The morning sun filtered through the soft haze, casting a golden glow over the quiet street. Standing tall and poised in front of a sleek black car, Grace Williams stepped out onto the curb. At 75, she moved with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of life and countless experiences. Her silver hair was styled in gentle waves that framed her face, and her classic tailored coat fit her perfectly, its elegance enhancing her natural grace. Though her age was evident, her presence was one of strength, dignity, and quiet authority. The private terminal before her sparkled with luxury, its polished marble floors shining under the bright morning light, streaming through the towering glass windows inside. Well-dressed travelers engaged in low murmurs, their designer bags and sharp suits a clear indication of the exclusivity that this place embodied. Grace, in contrast, pulled behind her a modest, well-worn suitcase, its simplicity standing in stark contrast to the opulence around her. Each step she took echoed softly against the marble as she walked toward the reception desk. The young attendant, in a crisply pressed uniform, looked up as Grace approached. A polite smile appeared on her face, but there was a brief, almost imperceptible pause in her expression, one of hesitation. "Good morning, ma'am," the attendant greeted her, her voice polite but tinged with something less welcoming. "How may I assist you today?" Grace, her voice calm and steady, met the receptionist's gaze with an air of quiet authority. "I'm Grace Williams. I have a reservation for the jet to Miami." The receptionist's fingers danced over the keyboard, her brow furrowing momentarily as she processed the information. After a brief moment, she looked back up, her professional mask quickly returning. "Ah, yes, I see your reservation. The flight is about to depart. Please follow me." With a nod, Grace followed the attendant down the plush corridor, her heels making soft, deliberate sounds against the deep carpet. They reached Gate 7, and there, parked on the tarmac, was a pristine white jet, its sleek lines and polished exterior a testament to its luxury. At the bottom of the jet's staircase stood the captain, a tall, middle-aged man in a sharply pressed uniform, exuding an air of authority. The attendant gestured toward Grace as they approached. "This is Mrs. Williams, boarding the flight to Miami," she announced. The captain's gaze scanned Grace from head to toe, his eyes briefly flickering with surprise as they lingered on her simple luggage, her graceful yet unassuming presence. His lips tightened, and his brow furrowed as he addressed her, his tone colder than before. "This is a private charter," he said, his voice clipped. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" Grace's spine straightened at the question, but her composure never faltered. With a calm yet unyielding voice, she replied, "I am indeed." Her unwavering confidence in that moment seemed to throw the captain off balance. His eyes flicked to the attendant, who nodded in confirmation, but there was still a trace of doubt in his expression. Without another word, he stepped aside, allowing her to board the jet. As Grace ascended the staircase, she couldn't shake the feeling that her presence had been judged in some subtle, yet undeniable way. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered this kind of bias, people seeing only what they assumed about her rather than who she truly was. But this time, there would be a twist to the story, a revelation that would turn the situation on its head. Once inside the jet, Grace found her seat in the plush cabin. She settled in, pulling out a book, but her mind kept drifting back to the captain's words. The flight to Miami would be long enough for her to reflect. Little did she know, her journey today would end in a way no one could have predicted. The captain's expression remained doubtful, his gaze fixed on Grace as if searching for something that didn't align with his expectations. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" he asked again, his voice carrying an undercurrent of skepticism. "And do you have a boarding pass?" Before Grace could respond, a second flight attendant appeared, clipboard in hand. She glanced between the captain and Grace, her eyes sharp and questioning. "Is there a problem?" the attendant asked, her voice laced with a hint of concern. The captain sighed, his tone growing more curt. "I'm just confirming it's unusual for last-minute changes on a flight like this." Grace, maintaining her poise, reached into her handbag and retrieved her phone. With a few swift taps, she brought up the reservation details and handed the device to the attendant. "Here you go," she said, her voice calm and unflinching. The attendant's eyes quickly scanned the screen, her demeanor softening almost instantly. "Everything's in order," she said, her voice warmer now. "Mrs. Williams is confirmed for this flight." She turned to the captain, her tone neutral. "She's good to go." The captain's face hardened for a moment, but he stepped aside, muttering under his breath. "Very well. Welcome aboard, ma'am." Grace nodded politely, her composure unshaken as she began to ascend the steps to the jet. Yet, despite the captain's reluctant gesture, the air around her still seemed heavy with judgment and suspicion. As she reached the top of the staircase, two flight attendants exchanged glances behind her, their whispers just loud enough for Grace to hear. "She doesn't belong here," one of them muttered under her breath, her voice dripping with disbelief. Grace paused for just a moment, her hand resting on the polished rail. The words were not unfamiliar to her, judgments made without understanding, assumptions based solely on outward appearances. Rather than let the comment affect her, she simply continued into the jet's cabin, her demeanor as calm and composed as ever. Inside, the cabin exuded the kind of luxury one would expect from a private charter: plush leather seats, gleaming wood finishes, and the subtle scent of fresh flowers filling the air. Grace set her modest bag down beside an empty seat, her movements graceful and deliberate. The sting of the crew's dismissive attitudes still lingered, but she would not let it shake her. She had long learned to rise above such moments with dignity. Moments later, the captain entered the cabin, his voice stiff and formal, as though trying to assert control over the space once more. "Mrs. Williams, we'll be departing shortly," he announced, his tone laced with a hint of condescension. "May I ask who arranged this flight?" Grace turned to face him, her posture unwavering. "My son, Elijah Williams," she replied evenly, her voice calm but firm. "He owns this jet." The captain's confident air faltered at her words. The subtle shift in his expression was unmistakable. His gaze flickered, uncertainty creeping into his features. "Your son owns this jet," he repeated, his voice now tinged with hesitation. "That's right," Grace confirmed, her gaze steady and unyielding. "And I suspect he'll want to hear about the treatment I've received today." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their truth. The captain remained silent for a moment, the discomfort spreading across his face. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted, the tension palpable, as Grace calmly retrieved her phone once more. She tapped a number into the screen, her fingers steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "Elijah," she said when he picked up, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable firmness. "I'm on the jet, but there's an issue with the crew. They've made it clear that they don't think I belong here. I need you to handle this." She ended the call with the same quiet resolve that had marked her throughout the entire exchange. Setting her phone down, Grace allowed herself a brief silent exhale. She had endured similar moments of prejudice countless times throughout her life, when others saw only her age, her appearance, or the assumptions they made about who she was, but her years of experience had taught her to meet such judgments with grace, never allowing them to dictate her worth. As the hum of the jet's engines grew louder, Grace clasped her hands together in her lap, her resolve firm. She would not let this moment define her. Her dignity, poise, and quiet strength would remain unshaken, no matter how the world saw her. And as she settled back into her seat, the echoes of the crew's assumptions faded into the background, replaced by the certainty that she would never let anyone, no matter how powerful or dismissive, make her feel less than she was. The tension in the cabin was thick, the weight of Grace's words settling over the crew like a heavy cloud. The attendants, who had been moving through their final preparations, froze mid-action, exchanging uneasy glances. No one spoke. The silence was deafening. Grace, however, remained composed as ever. Without a flicker of hesitation, she reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. With practiced precision, she dialed Elijah's number. "Elijah," she said, her voice calm but laced with quiet authority. "I'm on the jet, but there's a problem with the crew. They've made it clear that they don't think I belong here. I need you to handle this." She ended the call with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the morning, despite the unsettling behavior of the crew. Her exterior remained calm, but internally, Grace felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, judged by nothing more than her appearance. The ache wasn't anger, but a quiet, weary disappointment. It was a reminder that, despite decades of progress, some prejudices still lingered. But Grace had long learned not to let such moments define her. The sting of their judgment might hurt, but it wouldn't break her. She had spent her life teaching her children the importance of resilience, dignity, and standing firm against injustice. Now, as the jet hummed with anticipation for takeoff, she knew her son Elijah would carry those lessons forward, just as he had always done. A few minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up to the terminal, and Elijah stepped out, his presence immediately commanding attention. Dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, his every movement was deliberate and purposeful. His eyes scanned the surroundings, sensing the weight of the situation as he walked toward the jet. The crew outside straightened, sensing that things were about to change. When Elijah boarded the aircraft, his expression was resolute, his eyes scanning the cabin before settling on his mother. "Mom," he said warmly, crossing to her and taking her hands in his. "Are you all right?" Grace offered him a faint, reassuring smile, her composure unbroken. "I'm fine, Elijah," she replied softly. "But this crew needs to learn a lesson in respect." Elijah's jaw tightened as he turned to face the crew, now standing awkwardly in the doorway. His voice was calm, but it carried an unmistakable edge of authority. "My mother deserves the same respect you would show any client, no more, no less. She's the reason I'm where I am today, and she deserves nothing less than your utmost professionalism." The captain, still in disbelief, opened his mouth to respond, but Elijah cut him off with a sharp glance. "There's nothing more to discuss," he said coldly. "Your actions have already spoken for you." Turning to the rest of the crew, Elijah's tone shifted, his words heavy with finality. "Effective immediately. You're all relieved of your duties. I'll be assembling a new team, one that understands what it means to represent this company and its values." The crew stood frozen, their discomfort palpable as they absorbed the weight of Elijah's words. Heads lowered, they began to file out of the cabin, avoiding both Elijah's piercing gaze and Grace's calm, knowing eyes. With each departure, the tension in the air dissipated, leaving only the quiet hum of the jet's engines. Once the last of the crew had left, Elijah returned to his mother's side. His expression softened as he gently squeezed her hands. "It's taken care of, Mom," he said, his voice warm. "No one disrespects you and gets away with it." Grace's face relaxed into a smile, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, Elijah," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I've raised you well." With the cabin now quiet and the tension lifted, Grace leaned back into the plush seat, her gaze drifting toward the clouds outside. As the jet began to taxi down the runway, she reflected on the events of the day she had raised a son who would always stand up for what was right, and for her. In that moment, she knew that while the world still had much to learn about respect and fairness, Elijah would always fight for those values, just as she had taught him. As the jet ascended into the sky, the wind whistled gently outside, and Grace allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply, feeling the weight of the day's challenges lift from her shoulders. She looked at her son, sitting beside her, and smiled again, her heart full. Elijah glanced over at her, sensing the shift in her mood. "You've always taught me to stand up for what's right, Mom," he said quietly. "No one gets to disrespect you, not on my watch." Grace nodded, her heart warmed by his words. She had spent her life instilling values of fairness, dignity, and compassion in her children. Seeing those values reflected back at her, especially now, was the greatest reward. The sting of prejudice was something she would continue to face, but it was moments like this, moments of quiet strength and unwavering support, that reminded her of the importance of challenging injustice wherever it appeared. With the jet now soaring above the clouds, Grace closed her eyes for a moment, her mind at peace. The world may still be full of assumptions and biases, but as long as her family stood together, she knew they could face anything with dignity and strength. Grace leaned back into her seat, the hum of the jet's engines a steady reminder of the journey ahead. Her eyes lingered on the endless stretch of sky outside the window, her mind lost in thought. She had faced judgment countless times before, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't alone. Elijah stood by her, unwavering in his support. That knowledge filled her with a sense of peace, a quiet reassurance that she would never have to face the world's prejudices alone again. As the jet climbed higher, Grace reflected on the path she had walked in life. So many times, she had been dismissed, overlooked, or judged solely by the way she looked. Though each of those moments still stung, she had learned to meet them with quiet strength. Grace had long understood that change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with moments like this, standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means confronting prejudice head-on. She knew the fight was far from over. The world still had a long way to go. Assumptions and biases would always rear their ugly heads, but Grace found hope in the knowledge that every act of courage, every stand taken against injustice, was another crack in the wall of prejudice. Each small, brave act brought the world closer to a place where respect and dignity were the rule, not the exception. The clouds outside seemed to stretch endlessly, a metaphor for the future she envisioned. Grace didn't believe the world would change in an instant, but she knew it was possible. One step, one confrontation, one moment at a time. And this was one of those moments. This wasn't just about her. It was about the broader fight for equality and justice. The way she and Elijah had handled this situation wasn't just a personal victory. It was a reminder that standing up for what's right, even in the face of bias, could make a difference. Grace's story was a powerful reflection of the importance of treating all people with respect, regardless of their appearance or background. When we judge others based on assumptions, we perpetuate a cycle of inequality. But when we challenge those biases, we take a step toward breaking that cycle. Elijah's response to the crew's treatment of his mother wasn't just about protecting her, it was about setting a standard. By addressing the issue directly, Elijah not only upheld Grace's dignity, but also sent a message that respect and professionalism cannot be compromised. His actions spoke louder than any words could, and in doing so, he became a living example of the values he had been taught. This wasn't just about Grace and Elijah, it was about all of us. It was a call to examine our own assumptions and biases. How often do we judge someone based on what we see? How often do we let our prejudices dictate how we treat others? And what might happen if, instead, we chose to treat everyone with respect, no matter who they are or how they look? It's easy to overlook the impact our actions have, but every interaction, every moment of fairness or understanding, contributes to a larger shift in how we treat one another. If we all took a moment to reflect on how we would want to be treated, no matter the circumstances, we could build a more compassionate, just world. As Grace sat quietly, surrounded by the quiet luxury of the jet and the support of her son, she knew that the fight for respect and dignity wasn't just her battle. It was everyone's. Every choice, every act of kindness and fairness would contribute to the change she knew was possible, one respectful interaction at a time. Grace turned to Elijah, her heart full of gratitude and pride. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I knew you'd be there for me." Elijah smiled, his expression warm and resolute. "Always, Mom. No one disrespects you. Not on my watch." The jet continued its ascent, and as the clouds parted to reveal the vast sky above, Grace felt a quiet sense of peace. She had raised her children to be strong, fair, and compassionate, and this moment, this act of courage, was proof that those lessons had taken root. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for the future, for a world where respect and dignity were universal. The journey was long, but it was worth every step. Thank you for watching this video and taking the time to reflect on this important story. If this resonated with you, share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below. Together, we can create conversations that challenge stereotypes and advocate for fairness. Remember, change starts with us. One respectful interaction at a time. Until next time, stay kind, stay just, and let's work together to build a world where dignity is extended to all.